All right, good evening, everybody. I'm sorry about interrupting the last video, but it's always better to break the videos up into smaller portions because then more people will listen to them. So the last video was more of a religious take, a biblical take. My name's Joe Kolakowski. My Hebrew name's Yitzchok Zev Kolakowski. I'm the rabbi of the online Hasidic community, the Koblenzer Hasidic community. On the name of the Kahal Chavos Yair, the Koblenz, in memory of my holy ancestor, the Chavos Yair, who was the rabbi of Koblenz and Worms in Germany before the Hasidic movement began. But many of the things that he wrote and his lifestyle was in many ways similar to the later Hasidic movement, and embracing a lot of the classical ideas of the Hasidei Ashkenaz that preceded in Worms much earlier in history. In any event, as I mentioned, I made the previous video that discussed more of a biblical, a Torah look at these questions, but now I wanted to discuss more of a political approach. And as I mentioned earlier today, I was in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Beis Lechem, the House of Bread, and I had an appointment to perform a civil wedding ceremony. And on the way there, I noticed some people demonstrating their support for our great president, who I support as well. And when they asked people to honk to show their support of the president, I did so. And there were two groups, one when I first came into the town, more or less, and another one a little bit further into town. And by that second group, and that was a smaller group, the first group was probably over 100 people, both sides of the road, maybe even 200 people, showing their support for the president. Again, I don't know if the president was in the area today. I didn't hear anything about that. I would like to see him if I could have, but I don't know what the story was there. And then, as I said, further into town, there was a smaller group, maybe 15, 20, 30 people, also showing their support for the president. And a little to the side before them were two young women who were demonstrating their contempt for the president, which they are welcome to do. There's a free country. And so the one had, like I said, an obscene sign cursing the president. And the second one had a sign that said, "Please stop pretending that racism is patriotism." That was what her sign said. And I want to refute that sign. I support her freedom to make this such a stupid claim, but then I also want to get into who are the real racists. Are the Republicans racist? Or maybe, just maybe, are the Democrats racist? So if you're a little bit more sophisticated and you're aware a little bit of history, you know, of course, that historically the Republicans were the original anti-racists, and the Democrats, from the time of Andrew Jackson, through most of their history, were a party of racism. They were the party of slavery, and after slavery ended, they were the party of the Ku Klux Klan and of Jim Crow. They were, no one can deny, the party of racism. The claim, and of course, the Republicans were the party of Lincoln, the party that freed the slaves. That is plain history. There was never a Republican slave owner, ever, in the history of the Republican Party. Of course, the Republican Party only began very shortly before slavery was abolished. Maybe about 10, 15, at most 20 years. 15 years before the abolition of slavery. And the first president of the Republican Party was Lincoln, who freed the slaves. And these are undeniable historical facts. And some people point out that Ulysses S. Grant, who later was a president in the Republican Party, owned a slave. The fact of the matter was that it wasn't really his, it was his wife's slave that she had inherited from her father. But the part that people leave out when they bring that up was that at the time, General Grant was a Democrat. But so that's a bit of history that people forget. And so historically, it was the Democrats that were the party of racism, of Jim Crow, of the KKK, of slavery. The claim, however, is that there was a change. That the parties flipped, the parties switched. And that somehow, at some point in history, the Democrats became the anti-racists, and the Republicans became the racists. This is a ridiculous claim to begin with. And it's also a shameful one. To me, I almost compare it to if the Nazis, after World War II, said, you know what, we like this name Nazi, we want to still be called the Nazi Party, but we are actually no longer racist, and actually the people who fought against us, they're the racists now, and that's pretty much going to be what they're going to say, is that actually the Nazis are no longer the racists. It's whoever fought the Nazis in Germany, those are the racists now. But the Nazis still want to keep that name, National Socialist Nazi. They don't want to give up that name. In a certain sense, that's what happened. The only difference is that the Democrats didn't murder millions of black people the way the Nazis murdered millions of minorities, Jews and Gypsies and all other kinds of minorities that were in Europe at the time. But early on in Nazi history, before the genocide began, there were a lot of similarities, to the point where the truth was that the Nazis actually learned a lot of the ideas that when they formed the Nuremberg laws and so forth, that started to disenfranchise people who were members of certain minority groups, particularly Jewish people, was on the basis of their blood. And they argued that they studied what the Democrats did in America with Jim Crow and so forth, and they found it to be too untenable for them, meaning whereas the Democrats in the American South made laws that pretty much declared someone to be African American if they had one drop of African ancestry, blood, one drop of blood. The Nazis said that was untenable, and they would only persecute someone as a Jew if they're going back 3 generations and not further than that. So in a certain sense, the Democrats were more racist than the Nazis. It's just that the Nazis were murderers and were committed genocide, that the Democrats did not do as much. To a certain extent they did with attacking the Native American communities in the plural, but they never committed a genocide against the black people until about 100 years ago when they started Planned Parenthood. And so, and they took their lynchings, first they made it on a much bigger scale and took it, instead of being adults, they lynched black babies in the womb. And that's what goes on to this day under the Democrat regimes. Is that there's, in New York City, a black baby is much more likely to be aborted than to be born. And that's thanks to the Democrats. And they might try to cloak it in this idea of a woman's choice, etc., etc., but we know, if we study the history of the Planned Parenthood movement and so forth, it's based in eugenics. It's the same ideology that the Nazis had, and it was designed to destroy the black race in America. This is the institutionalized racism. It's not the Republicans, it's the Democrats. Historically, at the very least, right? This claim that there was a flip, there's no basis for this. This myth that the parties switched can be disproven very easily. Dinesh D'Souza is the one who most masterfully brought these subjects up. And one of the ideas that he brought up was that African Americans started to vote Democrat before this alleged switch happened. It was really in the times of FDR, who was certainly a racist, even though he was from New York. But FDR, who put Americans of Japanese ancestry into internment camps, who chuckled and found it to be very cute when he visited Saudi Arabia, and he saw slavery right before his eyes, and he said, "Oh, this is a hoot to see, something that we had gotten rid of some 70, 80 years ago, and here in Saudi Arabia, the Arab king still has a black slave." And he writes in his diary, it was a hoot. That's what FDR thought of slavery, not how horrible and evil it is, but a hoot, because he's a Democrat. And so which party is it that cares about identity politics? It's the Democrats. In fact, again, if you want to make the Nazi comparison, look at the Nazis. They were about big government. They were about gun control, eugenics, abortion, and other birth control methods like that, sterilizing people and so forth. They were obsessed with identity politics. And many other things that you can compare the Nazi ideology to the Democrat ideology, and there's much more in common there between the Nazis and the Democrats than the Nazis and the Republicans, the party of Lincoln. And there's other things to consider when we talk about the history of the Democrats and the current ideology of the Democrats. And it's contained within the name. The word Democrat, of course, comes from demos, which is also where we get the word demographic. And that's what the Democrats care about, is the demographic. Because in a democracy, you might have two wolves and a sheep voting on who's for dinner. Whereas in the Republic, the rights of the minority are protected from the tyrannical majority. And so that's what we have here when it comes to the Democrats versus the Republicans. It's this question of a demographic. That's what the Democrats care about, and so everybody has to be put into groups. And so, of course, you have men and women, and then you have different races, maybe different religions, and then they start inventing new groups that never classically were groups, basing on people's sexual preferences or identities and so forth, that were never considered to be in classical, Western culture or Eastern culture to be really separate groups or entities. The only classical community that I could find that really identified people in such a way would be, to a certain extent, the Native Americans, the Two Spirits. But when it comes, certainly in biblical literature, there was no identity based on sexual preferences, and it was just a recognition that there was behaviors that were considered sinful, and that's it. When it came to ancient Greece and so forth, people were not identified. People, practiced all various types of sexual behaviors openly, and they never identified that, this person is this type of a person because of this preference or that preference. It was just assumed that people would practice all these different types of behaviors. That's how it was in the pagan Greece, pre-Christian ancient Greece. So I don't really understand, why all of a sudden there's this whole push that people are to be identified into these groups, except that that's how the Democrats gain power, by appealing to people by identity politics rather than looking at people as individuals, which is what classically the Republican Party is all about. The rugged individualism, which is a classical American approach, as opposed to the collectivist ideology that other cultures and countries either had, or developed. So the idea of racism is in itself racist, because we shouldn't be looking at a society where we divide people by race. Which group is it that today is pushing for segregation? Well, the same old segregationists, the same old same old Democrats. I mean, Joe Biden, a segregationist. He did not want his children to be in an racially integrated school that he called a racial jungle. That was Joe Biden, who the Democrats have running for president. Joe Biden, whose mentor, as was Hillary Clinton's mentor, was Senator Byrd, a card-carrying member of leadership roles in the Ku Klux Klan. Some kind of Grand Flegel or something, I don't know what. And that was Senator Byrd. And yet here we are being told that we're the racists. So then why did Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden see as a mentor a Klansman? And they try to grasp at straws that with some kind of a claim that Donald Trump's father one time attended a Klan rally, when it's quite possibly just went there out of curiosity. I remember when Billy Graham came to Queens when I was in college. I went with another Bacher, who is now a younger man, and we both became ordained rabbis. We both have served rabbinical positions, and we went out of curiosity to go see. We got there too late. We didn't get to see Billy Graham, but we got to see the crowd that came to see Billy Graham, and that was interesting to see. Doesn't mean that we're Christians, of course not. We're Orthodox Jews, but out of curiosity, we wanted to see it, and so I would imagine. I don't see how different that would be. Obviously, I'm not comparing Christianity and the Klan in any way. That's not my point. But my point is that attending an event out of curiosity does not make you an adherent to those attendees of the event. And I don't know. And even with that being said, when we talk of President Trump's father, Fred Trump, we know the Bible tells us that the children don't die for the sins of the parents. Even let's say Fred Trump was a Klansman, which I don't think he was, or he was somehow sympathetic to the Klan, which I don't think he was. If he were, we should blame Donald Trump for that, for his father's actions. Of course not. It's ridiculous, and it's immoral to do so. And so to this girl who's holding up the sign saying, "Let's stop pretending that racism is patriotism," let me ask, which policies of President Trump are racist? Because if you watch the Republican convention, as I did, you saw a very anti-racist, universalist embracing of people of all different races, all different religions, all different nationalities, all united with their support for the country and with their support for the president. It was quite a beautiful event, and it was quite obvious that there was tremendous sincerity there with whoever it was who was speaking, whatever race and whatever religion and whatever other identity politic that the Democrats would embrace. You see that there's the Republicans are embracing, talking of the someone who's part of the homosexual community. Richard Grenell is one of the top positions. I don't mean that in any way as a double entendre, but that he has such a security clearance and such authority that was never granted by a Democrat. Because the point of the Republican ideology is not that we're scoring some kind of brownie points by appointing someone who is black or white or a man or a woman or who's Asian or Hispanic or who's gay or straight or this or that, but just who's the best person for the job. And it just happens to be that Richard Grenell is a pretty good person for this job. And he was not appointed by any kinds of affirmative action just because of his membership in the homosexual community, but rather because he is fit for the position. You'll have to excuse me for that. But people will say, well, Trump tried to ban Muslims. Well, Muslim is not a race. Islam is a religion of which anyone from any race can make their shahada and become Muslim. It's a quite easy thing to do. You can actually maybe just do it by accident. If you recite the shahada and go take a shower, you might wind up being Muslim. Obviously, you have to have the creed, but if you don't actually mean it, it doesn't mean it. But the point is that anybody of any race could become a Muslim. So even if there were a Muslim ban, that's not racist. That's religious bigotry and not racial bigotry. But there is no Muslim ban. The vast majority of Muslim countries are not under this ban. And all of the Muslim majority countries that were mentioned in the ban were actually, certainly the original version of the ban, prohibited not by Donald Trump, but by Barack Obama. The so-called Muslim ban was actually an Obama policy. And so was President Obama racist? Was he anti-Muslim because he placed a temporary restraining order on members, on people coming from these particular countries that were unable to be properly vetted? That somehow these are these are the people there. These are racist. This is a racist. This is an anti-Muslim. This is a bigoted thing which President Obama made. No, of course not. Nobody's going to claim that. And so when President Trump just continued the Obama policy, and then later added a few other countries that were not Muslim. So of course, what did the leftists say? Well, he's just trying to cover up that he's really bigoted against Muslims. No, not at all. He's just trying to prevent terrorists from entering the country. Doesn't matter what religion they are. What matters is what are they doing? And it's the same thing with any other religion. People say, well, it's racist, it's anti-Semitic to talk against George Soros or against the Rothschild bankers and so forth. Well, it isn't. Because if first of all, Judaism is a religion, not a race. And so therefore a Meshumid, a kofer, like George Soros, he's not the part of the Klal Yisrael. And he's an atheist. He's not part of the Jewish people. He left. He left the fold. He's an apostate. What's more than that is that whether or not it's true, the things that people say about George Soros, let's forget about whether or not they're true, but let's just say people believe that George Soros is guilty of any number of sins, of crimes against humanity. Isn't it racist or bigoted to say that he gets a pass because he identifies as Jewish in some form? To me, that's a denigration of the Jewish people. he gets a pass? No. If anything, he should be, like the prophet Amos says, only you have I known from all the nations of the face of the earth, so I will visit all of your sins upon you. Meaning that we should know better. So this is the story. So then we move on a little bit. So we've established that this claim that President Trump made a Muslim ban is false. Because, first of all, he didn't make it. President Obama made it, and it's not a Muslim ban. It's a ban, a temporary ban of certain countries entering the United States that happened. Many of them were majority Muslim, but these are countries that had danger issues. Then we move on a little bit more. And we come to the border wall and the kids being put in cages. Well, Hillary Clinton voted for a border wall. Bernie Sanders voted for a border wall. Kids are being put in cages under Obama's watch at the border. President Trump was trying to stop it, and the Democrats wouldn't let him. They didn't want him to take credit. So that is essentially what we have here. Is that pretty much everything that people accuse President Trump of being racist concerning, President Obama was guilty of, quote unquote. I don't think he's guilty. I think he's doing his job. And I don't see anything wrong with these things, except putting kids in cages. But even family separation, to a certain extent, is a positive thing, because you don't know. So it's quite an interesting thing to discuss here. And so that's what I would say, is that, to claim that somehow we are claiming that racism is patriotic, etc., etc., etc. No. It's not what we're doing at all. Well, thank you for listening. This video went on way too long. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. You can hit that little bell notification if you want to hear more messages like this. And if I record during the daytime, you can see them. And let's continue this conversation, though. I saw an article in the Forward that said, it's a religious imperative to get rid of Trump. And how many of the things that were claimed there that President Trump did were bad. It's a complicated issue. So thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we'll see you all later.